Checked at the food stores.
Check the food stores. What's going on here? I can explain.
You've gone too far! We've had enough of your orders! This ship is ours now! Hold fast! We'll not stand for it! Silence, I say.
The night the hammock went quiet. They pried the hammock open and found a man who did not breathe. The old sailor worked the rope with the bosun while the fabric folded back. A pale face stared up, lips grey, and a mottled rush ran along the forearm in irregular blotches. Suspicion rose in the old sailor like a taste of iron on his tongue. He did not call the name of the man, but he looked to the bosun and waited for the same alarm to appear. He's gone stiff. The bosun. Fingers on the canvas. We should wake the captain. The old sailor answered with a slow, steady motion, rubbing the dead man's wrist, searching for a pulse he did not expect to find. The discovery was immediate, sharp, and it carried a clear problem. A crewmate unresponsive in the middle of a long passage, far from land and supplies. They hauled the hammock forward into the narrow companionway and laid the body on the planked deck. The old sailor kept his hands on the man's shoulders. He had been at sea too many winters not to feel the pressure rise behind his eyes. He pressed his thumb into the man's palm as if testing rope fibers. Call the surgeon, the old sailor, naming the role rather than the man. Because here roles mattered more than names in an emergency. The bosun ran up through the low hatch and the steps creaked. On the foredeck the wind hammered the rigging. The captain's boots thudded down the ladder before the bosun reached the wheelhouse. The ship surgeon arrived with a satchel that smelled faintly of alcohol and herbs. He crouched, opened pouches, and tapped the man's chest. No breathing, the surgeon, and then he turned the body to look at the forearm. He spread the skin with slow fingers and frowned at the pattern of mottling that did not fit scurvy or frostbite. This is not ordinary. The surgeon, not scurvy. Not cold, the captain folded his hands, face set, watching the surgeon examine the limbs. The old sailor watched the captain watch the surgeon, and in that exchange the edge of command showed. How far could they move? Who would they tell? Which choices protected the ship? The captain's voice came low and flat. Contain it for now. No yelling in the waist. We cannot have panic. The bosun bristled. Captain, a whole watch deserves to know. We need to rearrange hammocks. We need space for the sick. The captain's jaw worked. I will not have men deserting their stations. Not now. The bosun leaned forward and spoke fast. If we do not tell them, someone else will see it and panic worse. We rearrange now. The old sailor watched the faces on the quarterdeck. He felt the argument as a change in the ship's balance. Hands that had been steady now hesitated. The choice between secrecy and honesty set the course of the next hours. The surgeon straightened and said, "We cannot cure this with what we have. If this is infection, it will spread. Ration the water, isolate the hammocks, and keep the wounded apart." The old sailor moved as if on signal. He tied a spare blanket over the body and assisted the surgeon in labeling the berth with a scrap of sailcloth. They did not shout. They folded the motions into their work. The bosun barked orders down the ladder, and the young deckhand moved like a kid learning to hold himself upright on a pitching deck. The old sailor's hands were deliberate. He lashed a spare rope, tightened a knot, checked a seam. Each motion was an attempt to hold fast to routine when routine was failing. A weather bank came without warning. The lookout shouted and the quarterdeck surged with sailors hauling at sheets. The wind sheared a sail and the boom slammed, down with the mizzen. The captain snapped. The old sailor grabbed a loose line and ran to the brace while salt spray cut across his face. On deck, men shouted names and commands, and the young deckhand lost his grip and stumbled toward the rail. The old sailor swung an arm and caught him by the sleeve, holding him back onto the deck. "Hold on, Tom," the old sailor, "hold on now." The bosun and a pair of hands moved a sagging hammock that sloshed with a sick man's weight. Rope groaned. The storm turned urgency into a raw physical demand. Keep the ship upright, keep the men from being thrown into the sea, keep the sick from being left to chance. Below deck, the carpenter's lantern showed a new problem. The carpenter shouted up that a barrel in the hold had been tampered with. The old sailor followed the carpenter, slight through the hold, and found a fresh cut in the staves and a cloth stuffed around the bung. Someone wanted less water in here, the carpenter, and he ran his hand along the seam where the wood had been pierced. The bosun knelt and pulled the cloth out. Sabotage? The bosun. The old sailor's suspicion hardened into a practical response. Check every barrel, count every ration, secure the stores. If water had been cut, then men would thirst. If men thirsted, they would act. The ship's thin margin for survival narrowed. Arguments spread like work orders. The captain called for 2 watches to remain on deck for guard. The young deckhand protested. "We are needed aloft, Captain." "We cannot leave the sails. You will keep watch here," the captain. "No one leaves their station for gossip." In the surgeon's nook, the surgeon sorted through names, listing those with fevers, those with coughing fits, those with bruises from heavy work. "Keep the infected away from the bread and the fresh water," he ordered. The old sailor set aside a ration tin and marked it with a splintered peg. He moved through the crew like a slow machine, touching shoulders, checking knots, handing out instructions passed down from the captain. A delirious sailor bolted from his hammock during the night and staggered toward the rail. The old sailor was on him in 2 steps, Don T. Go, the old sailor gripping his arm. The sailor thrashed, eyes glassy, mouth working air. He croaked. The bosun grabbed the other shoulder. "Hold him." The bosun yelled. The deck tilted beneath them as a wave struck. The old sailor felt rope under his boots slip. He planted his feet and pulled the sailor back from the rail. A hand came free and the sailor twisted toward the cutwater. The old sailor's fingers closed on a wet sleeve and he hauled until his shoulder burned. "Tom!" The bosun shouted. The delirious sailor clutched at the rail and screamed. For a long breath the ship and the men fought the sea and the human body both. The deck took the man's weight and the old sailor and the bosun dragged him below. The captain stood above them, drenched, and issued orders that came out like blows. "Seal the hammocks. Lash the wounded. Double watch. The surgeon will triage names. Any man who interferes will be put in irons." The old sailor moved to do what was ordered. He lashed a hammock with hands that did not shake. He watched the young deckhand look away when a man cuffed. Each command from the captain altered the way men moved and spoke. Obedience became the shelter under wind. The old sailor felt his own reluctance. He wanted to speak plainly to the crew, but he did not. He tightened a rope and followed orders instead. Later that night the carpenter returned with a cutlass and a lamp and said, "There's more here." He handed a splinter of wood to the old sailor. This came from around the bunghole upstairs. The carpenter, someone tried to draw water without opening the cap. They cut it to get at the inside and then stuffed that rag in. Why would any man do that? The old sailor turned the wood over in his hand and felt the wet stain. "To make us ration. The bosun to make us beg." To force a decision, the old sailor's suspicion moved again. First he had suspected contagion, now he suspected deliberate harm. He looked at the crew in the low light and tried to make the 2 possibilities sit together. Sickness and sabotage. The surgeon called names aloud, voice clipped. "Francis, Merle, Hobbob. Report to the nook." The men shuffled up one by one, faces drawn. The surgeon dipped a spoon into a bottle and smelled it, then held it under a man's nose. "Breath smells sore," he said. "Keep that man away from the biscuit." The old sailor held a small tin of boiled biscuit and watched the hands of a man who had lost more weight than seemed possible. That man reached, and the old sailor pushed the tin back to the surgeon. Don T feed him bread near the rest of the old sailor. The surgeon nodded and took the tin. Dialogue moved like a small machine, names, tests, commands. The crew learned information in these short exchanges and adjusted their behavior. Toward dawn the sea flattened. The men were bleary but held. The old sailor sat by a wrapped body and kept a watch. He counted names in his head and ticked them against a nail. Hob is resting. He told no one at first, then repeated it aloud to the bosun. The bosun answered with a short nod. The old sailor's hands moved on the rope, smoothing the edge of a blanket, checking the knot that bound the hammock to the beam. He hummed under his breath, a tune sailors used to keep time. Quiet motions kept the ship's small routine alive. Shift a knot, bail a bilge, check the oil for the lantern. Late that morning the young deckhand came to the old sailor with a problem. "Old sailor, someone's been taking my water ration," the lad said. "I swear I left the tin by my hammock." The old sailor looked at the boy's face. He did not soften. "Show me the tin." The old sailor. The boy handed it over. The old sailor smelled the rim and found it damp, but not with the oil the boy expected. "We will count the rations again." The old sailor. "We will watch who draws from the barrel." The captain overheard and called for a roll. "All hands line up." The captain ordered. "We check names, we check rations, and we seal the hold tonight. Anyone caught will be punished." The order shifted the crew's talk into a narrow channel. Scarcity sharpened habits. Scarcity demanded rules. They checked the hold. The carpenter inspected each barrel with the old sailor at his shoulder. "This one is light." The carpenter, tapping wood. The old sailor pried the bung and found that the cloth had been removed and the inside scraped clean. Someone knows how to open barrels quietly. The bosun. Someone on board has the time and nerve to do it while others sleep. The old sailor's hands tightened on the mallet. He thought of late nights and a hungry crew. He felt no moral clarity. He felt the practical shape of choices. He wrapped a rope around the barrel and lashed it to the frame. "We will lock it with the carpenter's hasp," he said. "And we will set 2 men on watch here every watch." The captain named the watchman. The carpenter and a tall seaman named Merle. At midday the captain called a short meeting on the quarterdeck. He spoke with rapid sentences. "We are 3 weeks from the nearest port. Water is low. I will not risk mutiny for rumors. Yet I will not let men starve." The bosun cut in. "Captain, if the men know we hide this, they will act without orders. We must tell them the shortages and how to preserve water." The captain shook his head. "Open talk invites theft. If men panic, we lose hands aloft and the ship." "I choose containment." The bosun and the captain argued in quick lines, 3 to 6 exchanges, each telling the other's name frequently. The old sailor watched both of them. He heard the captain mention crewmates by name when he assigned tasks. He heard the bosun call out men to take the hold watch. Those names made the decisions real and tied them to people. That night a delirious sailor bolted again and tried to climb the ratlines. The old sailor and the bosun both lunged. "Don T, go." The old sailor, gripping the man's collar. "Not tonight." The man's eyes rolled and he spit seawater. The bosun wrestled the sailor down while the young deckhand held a lantern. The deck creaked and a swell sent the ship sideways. For a heartbeat the man was loose, hands sliding on wet rope. The old sailor's arms locked around the sailor until his breathing slowed. "You are all right now?" The old sailor. The man muttered a name in a half voice and fell into a torpor. The old sailor felt his strength leaving in small, steady doses. During the lull the surgeon found evidence on a piece of cloth. Traces of oil and bitter herbs not used on the ship. He called the captain and showed him the sample. "These are not from our stores." The surgeon. "Someone brought them on board or someone found them in the holds and mixed them with the water." The captain frowned. "Then we have a saboteur, or a man who seeks advantage. We will question every man who had access to the hold." The bosun stepped forward. "Start with Merle and Francis." They were near the hold last. The old sailor agreed and helped call the names. The first external event in some hours became a concrete query. Who had been at the hold, who had motive and access? They questioned men two at a time in the companionway, pulling names from a list the surgeon read. Merle, where were you at midnight? The captain, I was fixing a ratline. Captain, Merle, asked the bosun. He knows I was aloft. Bosun, confirm it. The captain, I do not like the look of you. Merle, the carpenter muttered. A small chorus rose and the captain cut it off. Speak plainly. Merle, show us your hands. Merle rolled up his sleeves, and the captain saw colluses and a scar. No cuts here. The captain, but you were near the hold. You will watch the hold tonight. The old sailor watched the names and decisions fold into duty. Each assignment created a new boundary for suspicion. In the middle of the questioning, the carpenter called out from the hold. He had found a hidden scrap of cloth, tucked inside a barrel. The cloth had a Soon initial. The carpenter held it up. Look, he said, see the H there. The old sailor leaned close and read the letter. His memory turned to a face he had seen earlier. Hob, who had lost weight, who had coughed. Hob's name, the old sailor. The surgeon paled. Hob was ill days ago, and we kept him near the forehold. He has the strength to hide things. Bring him here, Hobby protested. I did not touch the stores, he said. I only moved barrels when the carpenter. The old sailor watched Hob's hands tremble and the bosun's jaw. A new twist had changed how they understood the earlier events. The scrap suggested someone with access and a mark, not a random theft. They held Hob while the ship rolled in an afternoon swell. The captain direct questions short and sharp. Hob, did you take water? No, captain. Who gave you that cloth? I found it in the hold. Captain, where did you put it? Hob's eyes dropped. He rubbed his fingers together. I put it near my hammock, captain. I thought I might mend my trousers, the captain barked. You will stand watch in the hold until we reach port. No exceptions, Hob swallowed and nodded. The decision removed him from his berth and placed him under watch. The old sailor felt the ship shift with each command. Decisions were acts of survival as much as punishment. That night the gale returned. The ship pitched and the men lashed themselves to belaying pins. The delirious sailor staggered, and for a heartbeat the old sailor thought he saw the pale face from the opening lying on the deck again. He ran down to the companionway and found the surgeon bent over a cot, counting breaths. How many now? The old sailor. The surgeon answered with a list. 3 with fevers, 2 with rashes, 1 who had stopped breathing. We need water for those we can help. The surgeon, but the hold is short. We ration and we pick who receives what. The captain named the triage, who got cloth soaked in wine to sop up fever, who would receive a single spoon of broth. The old sailor handed the surgeon a small cup and waited for him to nod. These choices were sharp and final. They were the only tools left. At dawn the sea calmed. The old sailor made a round and found the deck quiet. He sat by the rail and tied a coil of rope while he watched men move slowly to their tasks. The captain met him there and placed a hand on his shoulder. You did well, old man. The captain, you kept men from the rail. The old sailor felt his shoulders loosen a little but did not smile. He pointed to the hold. We must secure the stores and keep 2 on watch until the next landfall, he said. And we must watch Hob and Merle tonight. Both had access, the captain nodded. The old sailor looked out at the flat water and noted the pale line of horizon. He held the rope in his hands and felt the fibers rough under his palm. The chapter ended with the old sailor wrapping a thin blanket around the body from the opening and setting it under a lantern on the foredeck. He tied the blanket tight and tucked a coin into the dead man's jacket. A small brass token they used to mark a death for a burial at the next port. He wrote the man's name on a scrap of sail and fixed it to the hammock. Around him the crew moved with the brittle order of men who had been through a night of choices. The old sailor took the carpenter's hasp and added an extra twist of rope to the hold's latch. He stood back and watched the knot hold. He put his hand on the rail and called one name softly. Hob. Hob looked up and met his gaze, and for a moment both men knew the cost of the night's decisions. Then the old sailor went down into the companionway to arrange the next watch, the concrete pattern of duty continuing forward. Emotion route, suspicion emotion shifts, suspicion urgency resolve, resolve fear controlled action, rations and rumors. At first light the cook shoved the hold hatch and swore when he found a salted meat barrel slit open and nearly empty. Suspicion moved through the old sailor like a practiced H. He leaned, checked the staves, and lifted a damp scrap of cloth caught on the barrel ring. He tasted the problem with an old man's economy of gestures. Scrape, lift, knot. And then he called the bosun up from the hammocks. The immediate problem was clear in the next 3 breaths. Provisions were missing, and someone had cut into the stores. That threat to food meant a threat to every man's day ahead. He had not forgotten the pale face from the hammock, the grey lips and mottled rash he had seen with the bosun 2 nights before. The old sailor still kept that image like a ledger entry. The memory of the dead man was not a memory of air or fog, but a folded canvas, a brass locket, and a single pale forum. Now, in the forward hold, his suspicion sharpened into a plan of action. He turned the scrap in his fingers and walked toward the forward hatch to call the captain. "Bosun," he said, voice level and slow, "come look at this. What is it now?" The bosun barked, wiping his hands on his trousers as he came up the ladder. The old sailor pointed, barrel slit. "Meat gone. Cloth here." The bosun crouched, ran thumbs along the torn wood, and replaced his hard mouth with a thin line. "Who sleeps forward?" he asked. The old sailor named a few. Young deckhand Matson, and the cook's apprentice when the main watch is on deck. He the names one by one, each name like placing a coin on a counter. He kept his voice plain because plainness worked. Accusation could come later if evidence required it. They hauled the barrel to the quarterdeck, where the captain waited, a narrow man with a face that read shortage the way others rid weather. The captain's eyes moved over the torn staves, over the damp cloth, and then landed on the old sailor. "Tell me everything," he said. The old sailor rested the scrap on the rail, slit from here. Rag dragged toward the forward hatch. "Less than half the meat gone. Found this stuck in the staves." The captain nodded and called the bosun to fetch a list of the manifests. Voices rose among the men nearby. The term theft passed from mouth to mouth like a cold. Suspicion seeded frustration. Men leaned on the rail and watched the logs brought up. That was the first shift. Suspicion tilting into accusation. Murmurs followed them below. The bosun and the old sailor led a small party down the ladder to the storage bay. The surgeon came with a lamp, because the surgeon's eye had proved useful when the dead man was found. They moved through bundles of canvas, past stacked barrel hoops, and into the hammock bay where men slept head to toe. The air below smelled of tar, old rope, and the faint metallic tang the old sailor had come to identify after too many nights at sea. The surgeon ran his lamp over the canvas and stopped. "Look here," he said, small slashes in the sailcloth, and a tier where a hammock was pulled back. He tapped a pale smear on a barrel lid, same discoloration as the man's arm. The old sailor crouched. He recognized the smear from the dead man's arm the way he recognized a shiplist by sight. Uneven, patchy, like an oil stain moved with a clumsy hand. He had felt suspicion in the morning. Now doubt pressed in. The discovery changed the shape of the problem. If the marks matched, theft might be only a part of what had happened. Who slept nearest the torn hammocks? The bosun Matson's hammock was here, a deckhand said. Young deckhand rung his bell for the midnight watch and then turned in forward. "Matson is gone," the old sailor quietly. He meant the man found in the hammock 2 nights before. His voice did not do drama, it delivered fact. The surgeon glanced at him and then at the bosun. "We cannot rule contagion yet," the surgeon said. "But these tiers, someone has been working in the dark." They spread out to search. Under a burlap sack, the old sailor found something small and brass. He slipped his hand beneath the sack and drew up a locket, its hinge stiff with salt. He did not open it in the hold. He wiped it with a sleeve and held it to the light. Familiar engraving caught the lamplight. The dead man's initials. The locket smelled faintly of smoke and sweat. The bosun held up a scrap of paper found nearby and flattened it on his knee. It was a ration list, the ship's pay sheet used to tally shares and draws when biscuits went out. One name was circled in an ink that had blistered at the edges. The circled name was the young deckhand's. The room tightened around that small detail. Accusation folded in on itself and formed a sharper edge. The bosun slammed the list shut and shouted on the deck, "Bring the boy up." Now voices. Feet. The young deckhand was hauled up onto the main deck with his hands empty and his face pale. He wore the usual rolled trousers and a work shirt. His sleeves were clean, but his hands trembled. Men crowded, pressing close enough to smell the starch in his shirt or the salt where his hair did not lie flat. The bosun shoved the locket toward the captain. "Found this in the storeroom," he said, "found the circled name by it." He was in the forward watch. The young deckhand looked at the locket like a boy asked to explain a broken plate. "I never saw that before," he said. "I swear I never saw that. I ate my share, I slept after my watch. The cook asked Matson if he named me anything. I didn't. He, young deckhand, the captain, stand and tell me where you were after midnight. I stood watch on the lee bitts, sir. Then I turned in forward at one. Sir, who saw you?" The bosun demanded. For a moment the deck spun with names. Cook's a mate, a man who had been too drunk to record watches properly. The old sailor watched faces. He listened for the little tells he had read in port inns and merchant houses. A throat clearing when a man lied, a finger that rubbed the same colace when nerves came. He felt annoyance rise, then a second shift. From suspicion to a quiet, controlled anger at the idea of a man stealing rations when others might go hungry. "Captain," the surgeon said, voice low, "let me see him. If there's the same rush, we must change course of action immediately." The captain nodded with the authority of a man who knew how bad decisions cost ships. He ordered the young deckhand below for inspection. The bosun's jaw tightened as he gestured for men to part. The crowd fell back like a tide, and the old sailor followed the pair down the ladder and into the brig, where they confined the youth for questioning. They bound his wrists lightly, not with cruelty, but with a sense of containment that ships practice. The surgeon lit his lamp over the young man's forearm and then froze. The skin showed splotches, a mottled rash spreading from the wrist in irregular blotches, the same odd discoloration the old sailor had seen on the dead man. The surgeon's face grew hard with a professional concern. "Surgeon," the captain snapped, "tell me plainly. Is this what you saw before?" The surgeon's voice was steady. "Yes, it is similar. I cannot say with certainty without closer tests, but it matches the pattern on the corpse's forearm. We must assume this is medical, not mere theft." Panic budded among the crew like mold in a closed cask. A man near the hatch spat on the deck. "If it's sickness, we'll all go down," he said. "Who will feed our children then?" The bosun stepped forward enough. He barked, "Captain, what do you order?" Three emotions collided in the same moment. The crew's fear of contagion, the bosun's need to maintain order, and the captain's sense that his command would be judged by the choice he made next. The captain looked to the surgeon and then to the old sailor. The old sailor lifted his chin and did not speak until asked. "Captain," the old sailor slowly, "if the lad is sick, lock him below. Ration the stores. Keep men apart when you can. We cannot throw shares about as if nothing is wrong, and if he is innocent." The bosun sharply, "We keep a man locked while the rest go hungry. We risk mutiny over a scrap of meat. We risk mutiny if a contagion spreads and kills half the crew," the surgeon said. "We must prevent spread now and confirm later." That exchange tightened into a brief argument on the quarterdeck. The captain gave orders that sounded like compromise. Strict rationing, confinement of the young man, and a watch posted at the hatch to prevent further raiding of stores. He named the old sailor to oversee the night watch and the bosun to enforce the rationing. The old sailor felt the second major emotion shift then, from anger toward a practical, steady resolve to keep the men alive through small, concrete actions. Men argued in short lines. "That's not fair," one muttered. "He could be lying. We need bread for the watch," another said. "We do at least 2 men short now." The captain answered with a single sentence. "We ration to the last biscuit and keep our hands clean. Any man who steals will be judged after the surgeon's report." They moved like machinery to follow the captain's word. The cook was made to portion out smaller rations. Boxes were locked with a spare key taken into the captain's chest. The bosun put 2 men on watch at the hold and stationed a third by the hammocks. The surgeon prepared a narrow bunk in the brig for the young man. The old sailor paced the deck as dusk turned to a thin blue. He checked list after list, counted barrel heads beneath lamps, and made notes in the margin of things that might be important in the morning. Every 3 or 4 paragraphs since the hold, a new event had arrived. The discovery of the barrel, the summoned captain, the matching smear, the locket, the circled name, the youth dragged up, the rash revealed, the captain's decree. The narrative moved forward by actions, not by thought. The old sailor's choices followed the facts his hands found. At dusk, while men ate their rationed stew in hushed bowls, the young deckhand convulsed in the brig. The old sailor ran down the ladder when the bosun called his name. He found the young man doubled over, retching into a bucket and then falling limp across the boards. The surgeon was there with cold water and a steady hand. "Hold him," the surgeon said. "Old sailor, steady his shoulders." They steadied him. His breath came in short, wet pulls. The rash darkened as sweat slicked his skin. The surgeon's hands moved quickly, fingers testing pulse, feeling the cords of his neck. The bosun helped hold the boy upright. The old sailor felt the room narrow to the boy's chest, and the surgeon's instructions. "Surgeon," the captain called from the hatch. "Tell me what to do plainly. No soft words. Give me orders. Quarantine him. Secure his bedding. Burn anything contaminated. Ration water. He must not touch the rest of the stores. And mark his hammock until he is removed." The surgeon did not waste words. He wrote out a list of steps and thrust it at the bosun. The bosun's face turned red with a combination of effort and fury. "Mark him. Burn his hammock," he shouted. "He's a son of a dock rat." "Who will believe him then?" "You will obey my orders, the captain. Do it now, or I will find men who will." The bosun barked an order and men moved. They stripped the young man's bedding into a barrel, and the surgeon sprinkled turpentine over the cloth before lighting a single match with careful hands. The flame licked the burlap and then ate it. The smell stung and made several men step back. The surgeon's eyes met the old sailoress for a single, charged second. They both knew the consequence. Once burned, the bedding could not serve as proof of theft or innocence. After the burn, the bosun paced and then turned to the captain. "Captain, the men will talk. They've already been short a watch after Matson's death. They need to know who took the food, then tell them the truth. We don't know yet. The captain we ration, we guard, we examine. We will find the truth if it is here. But we will not let fear lead us to cut our own throats." That line slid into the men and held for a moment. Some nodded. Others spat into the sea. The old sailor felt a small, brittle relief. The captain's words had steadied men enough that they could sleep without immediate mutiny. But steadiness was not the same as safety. The old sailor shifted again from brief relief into a slow, watchful sadness that felt like counting losses. Night watch fell on the deck. The old sailor took his post under a single dim lantern. He moved slowly among the hammocks, noting which men slept fitfully, which chewed rationed biscuit like it might be their last for days, and who kept a hand near a knife. He felt the ship breathe its usual sounds. Timbers settling, a distant chain, the muffled creak where an oar or a rope met wood. He checked the locked stores twice before he let his shoulders loosen an inch. A young voice at the rail called out, "Old sailor." "What is it?" He asked without turning. "Will we make it to the next port?" The voice said. The question was small and direct, more practical than fearful. "We will try to make it, lad," the old sailor answered. He did not promise. He kept his language accurate, because promises aboard a ship were heavy. "We will keep the watch. We will keep the rations." He walked the deck in measured steps. He saw the boatswain at the hatch, chewing on a small pipe, watching. He saw the captain in the shadow of the wheel, writing a note to be sent at first light. He thought of the dead man whose hammock had gone quiet 2 nights before. That man had been found with a locket and a pail for and no answer. The locket had turned up again beneath a sack. The circled name on the pay list had made a scapegoat of a young man who now trembled in the brig. The worst twist had been that the circled name made a clear suspect, and the rash made that suspect pitifully innocent in the most dangerous sense. Infected. In the brig, the young deckhan's breathing found a small rhythm. The surgeon checked him at intervals. The old sailor stood at the hatch, feeling the shift of emotion from suspicion to anger to fear to a kind of resigned, practical vigilance. He kept his fingers busy on a coil of rope, rubbing the colosses until the motion steadied him. He could not fix the sickness with hands alone, but he could do what seamen had always done: keep watches, count rations, and hold the line. Before dawn, the old sailor found a scrap of paper tucked into the pocket of the burned bedding, a small, damp scrap with a name and a number. He took it to the surgeon and then to the captain. The number matched no chest allotment. The captain frowned and folded it away. The scrap would sit with the manifest through the night. When the first pale smear of morning moved across the sea, the captain ordered the brig door bolted. He assigned the surgeon and the old sailor to catalogue any further signs and to question men again at first light. "We will not rush to judgment, the captain. But we will not be soft either. Lives depend on steady hands tonight," the old sailor answered with a single nod. He had been a man who did not make speeches. He had been a man whose decisions were small and made to save the next day. He went below one last time to stand by the young deckhand's bunk, to smooth a blanket the surgeon had set aside, and to leave a single, very small ration of dry biscuit on a plate within reach. He did this because men needed small comforts that were also practical. A baked crumb to settle a stomach, a rope set neat to show order, a lantern trimmed so no one panicked in the dark. He returned to the deck and took his place under the lamp. The ship made the same slow sound it always did when there was trouble. The creak of rope on wood and the soft slap of water against old planks. Men murmured in their hammocks. The boatswain's boots sounded on the gangway above him. The old sailor kept watch with his hands occupied, his breath quiet, his eyes on the horizon and on the men. He did not know whether the circled name on the list meant theft, whether the smear meant contagion, or whether the locket had been planted. He only knew what the ship asked of him: watch, ration, record, and protect. When the captain called the men to a short muster at first light, he read the surgeon's initial notes aloud, and then closed his mouth on the word, contagion, while still making it plain that caution would rule the next days. He assigned men to new tasks. He ordered that all hammocks be examined, and that the stores be coffered with the key in his chest. Finally, he posted the boatswain and the old sailor to take charge of the detail that would search the rigging for further slashes. "We stand together for now," he said. "We will not let fear make enemies of us while the truth is still being found." The line hung there, and the men obeyed, their faces set to match the new orders. As the crew dispersed, a sharp voice rose from the crowd. "Captain, if it is sickness, we need to know which passage brought it here. Who else touched those barrels?" "That is why the old sailor and the surgeon will log everything," the captain answered. "Write your name and the time you handled any stores. We will trace it. "We will not guess," men muttered and trudged away to their duties. The old sailor moved to the forward hatch with the bosun and began noting names and times as the captain had ordered. Each entry felt like a stitch being sewn into fabric that might yet hold. The old sailor's hands wrote neat, practical marks. Each name written made suspicion less a blind gust and more a map trail. When the old sailor wrote the young deckhan's name a final time, he felt the sadness he kept in a pocket loosen a fraction. He had seen the dead man's hand in the hammock. He had found the locket. He had watched the boy convulse. He had watched men argue. He had ordered the burn. He had rationed the stew. He had left a single dry biscuit for a man who might have been falsely accused and might yet be dying. The chapter closed on that small, deliberate set of acts. The ledger, the ration, the watch. The next morning would bring questions the ship would answer in work and in waiting. Outside, the sea ran a steady, low line. The ship kept her course. The old sailor tightened his knot and breathed the salt into his lungs. He walked the deck once more, counted the men by name, and then took up the first watch as ordered. The immediate danger had been named, and the captain's decree had split the crew's attention between fear and duty. The old sailor's resolve had shifted again into a patient, guarded duty. To keep small comforts safe, to watch for the rush, and to hold men to their tasks until the next clue revealed the truth. The night had given them a problem and an order. The morning would ask for answers and for more decisions. He let the lantern sway a little as he looked toward the horizon and felt the cold of watchkeeping in his bones. He kept his hands busy and his eyes open. The ship needed steady hands. The men needed someone to count biscuits and to count names. The old sailor lowered the coil of rope into his lap and listened as the bosun's footsteps crossed the deck. The captain's chest lay closed in the small cabin below. The surgeon's light moved like a slow second star in the gloom. The next event would be the surgeon's report and the captain's new order. Until then, the ship and its people held their breath and their rations. The chapter ends with the old sailor tightening a knot and turning slowly toward the brig as a new day began, the ledger in his hand and a watchful calm in his chest. A young deckhand dropped to his knees on the lee rail, hands clawing at the seam of his shirt, and the muster split into shouts and running feet. Suspicion tightened in the old sailor's chest like a rope pulled taut. He had seen a corpse in a hammock 3 nights before, and he had smelled spoiled meat in the hold at dawn. "Bill, get him down," barked the bosun, and men formed a rough circle around the fallen man while the old sailor pushed through with a lantern. The immediate problem stood clear. A man on the deck convulsed, the same blanching at the lips the old sailor had watched under canvas, and the ship's fragile trust could not withstand another unexplained death. The old sailor moved without idle thought. He lifted the deckhand's head and felt the skin slide under his fingers. He pressed his thumb where the wrist should have been, searched for a pulse, and felt the small, frantic tremor that meant the surgeon's hands would be needed. "Surgeon," he called. The call drew the ship's medic from below with a jumper still slung over one shoulder. The surgeon knelt, gave a cold glance, and hauled the man below through the forward hatch. That descent felt like stepping into the ship's guts. Close air, the metallic tang of brine and old tar. The old sailor followed, lantern held steady, and his suspicion shifted from a private worry to something wider. The hold had yielded a corpse once already. The cook had sworn at dawn when he found a slit barrel. Now a Lev man carried the same pallor. Below, the surgeon spread coarse sailcloth and ordered the hatch fastened. "We keep him from the others," the surgeon said. "We keep the hold closed. No one touches rations." The words landed like orders in the old sailor's ears and then broke into a dozen murmured questions. The cook stood with arms folded, hands smelling of brine and pepper. He met the old sailor's eyes with a look that was not guilt but not innocence either. The old sailor stepped closer to the cook. "Did you pack today's meat yourself?" he asked. His voice stayed level. The old sailor's suspicion had to show in how he moved, not in a speech. The cook's jaw bunched. I packed what I was given. I didn't tea-slit anything. The bosun cut in. Someone's been taking from the stores. We found a barrel slit open this morning. The old sailor drew the memory of the damp scrap of cloth from his mind and held it like evidence. The captain arrived, hands stained from charting and a ledger under his arm. He did not shout. He needed his orders to sound like law. Secure the hatch, he said. Keep watch. No one aloft unless I say. The second mate stood beside the captain, eyes down, fingers working at a torn corner of his coat. The old sailor watched that motion and stored it in his head, as if the coat's torn edge were another small clue. At the makeshift sick bay the surgeon worked with blunt instruments and quiet commands. He found the same mottled rash the old sailor had seen under the hammock's canvas. The surgeon's face grew harder. Same pattern as the other man, he said, same pallor. We test for food poisoning and scurvy, but this, he let the sentence hang. The old sailor felt his suspicion split again, becoming fear. If the hold's salted meat caused this, then the theft might be more than petty pilfering. Outside, voices rose. A group of men crowded the galley hatch and demanded answers. Cook, did you sell any meat ashore? One man barked, Cook! Another shouted. The cook stepped forward, shoulders squared. I swear on the galley, I kept the barrels locked. Whoever took it did it after I left. The bosun shoved through the crowd. We found a torn paybook in a locker, he said. The room went colder. The old sailor's suspicion picked at him like salt. There was more than a simple theft. The men dragged the sealed locker from beneath the rat lines and pried it open. A barrel lay inside with its stave swollen and dark. The meat within turned to a slick rust color. Beside it lay a paybook with a name stamped on the inside page. The old sailor read that name and felt a new chord of alarm. The ledger bore an officer's mark. A man with a badge had access. That shifted blame upward. The second mate tried to steady the talk with a flat voice. We account for what leaves ship's stores from the ledger. The captain signs for provisions taken ashore. He showed his hands as if that explained everything. Men murmured. The old sailor watched where the second mate's gaze flicked, toward the captain, toward the ship's binnacle, and then down to where the hammock frames swung. The old sailor noticed the set of the second mate's mouth and the way his thumb rubbed a seam of his coat. Late that night the men gathered at the binnacle, a crowd held taut by the storm, light moving over the sails. The captain stood by the compass box and opened the ledger on the almanac. Lantern light painted the pages in flat swaths of amber. The bosun read aloud entries that did not match the manifest, hands pointed, faces closed. The old sailor heard a sudden hiss of anger. Why are there entries for meat we don't have? The bosun demanded. The captain ran a calloused finger down the ledger to raise coin ashore. To buy stores we could not secure at the last port, he kept his voice tight. It was a one-off arrangement. It will be accounted for. The bosun spat a short laugh. Accounted for by who? Whose ledger is torn? The men pressed forward. The old sailor stepped between them and the captain, palms open on the rail. The crowd's anger sharpened into accusation. You signed for extra provisions, Captain. One man said, you sold our rations? Another cried. The captain did not deny the ledger entries now. His face reddened, but he laid out a narrow justification. We needed salted meat for the voyage. I arranged a sale to a provisioner. It was meant to keep us afloat. That claim did not calm the men. The old sailor felt a swell of betrayal move through the crew. Suspicion had become anger. The second mate tried to speak, voice thin. I only carried orders. The ledger showed the exchanges. The old sailor could see the second mate's fingers fold and unfold, and the action read like a confession. He heard men shout for action, to bind the second mate, to throw him to the lash. The surgeon leaned forward and said, we have a sick man below with the same marks as the dead one. We may be sick because of the stores, or worse. We cannot afford carelessness. The line between accident and intent narrowed. Accusations turned to a push of bodies. The bosun seized the second mate by the collar while another man reached for the ledger. Lanterns jounced, a crate tipped. Someone cursed and pushed a man aside. The captain grabbed the ledger back and faced the crew squarely. "You will not kill one another over this book," he said. His voice snapped like a sail. "I will have order. I will not see my ship torn by suspicion." The old sailor watched the captain's mouth and the way his hands trembled slightly. The crowd did not settle. The second mate's eyes flashed with something like fear and defiance. "You left me with the ledger, Captain. You mean to keep the entries balanced. You mean it would be easier ashore." He spoke quickly now. You needed funds. You signed the exchanges yourself." The captain's jaw tightened. Men traded hard glances. The old sailor felt the crew's faith fracture in a new place. Not only in provisions, but in leadership. A man shoved the captain. The captain shoved back. The bosun stepped between them and pushed men away with broad shoulders. "Enough. The bosun, we haul rope, we patch sails, we keep the ship together. We do not kill one another unless we know the sword's edge." The old sailor put a hand on the bosun's arm. He needed to smell who would back whom. He smelled tar, sweat, and the bitter tang of fear. The old sailor's suspicion moved again, this time into a guarded calm. He would hold the thin mercy that kept the crew functioning. Under the pressure, the captain admitted a method he had used ashore to raise funds. Furtive sales of small stocks and secret deals with a provisioner who promised fresh stores on credit. "I thought I could keep it from the men, the captain. It was to save us. I did not expect theft or sickness." The second mate's face paled. "You mean to tear the entries if needed," he said. "You mean to hide the marks." Voices rose like a wind. The old sailor listened to the exchange and then spoke, his voice low. "Captain, names will not fill bellies if men die. Second mate, you signed nothing without orders. Bosun, you hold the men back. Surgeon, we follow your call for the sick." His words were not a reprimand so much as a sequence of tasks. Suspicion still sat in his chest, but he folded it into action. The crew needed direction more than rhetoric. That night they confined the second mate below with a rope across his chest and the captain's men standing guard. The surgeon ordered the sick man kept quiet and fed small sips of broth. The old sailor was given the duty of overseeing redistributed rations. He counted the remaining salt meat and dry biscuits under a lantern that swung with the ship's breath. Each ration measured like a small promise. In the brig the second mate paced and cursed. "You put this on me," he said quietly to the bosun when the guard left the door ajar for fresh air. "You put it on me and I took the ledger because you told me to." The bosun's reply came brusque and simple. "You did as you were ordered. We will see what the captain will do when he sleeps, and here's the surgeon's report." The old sailor stood near the hatch, listening to the confessions and the sound of rope being tied. A small discovery interrupted their tired motions. A scrap of salted cloth tucked in a seam of the second mate's coat matched the scrap the old sailor had found on the barrel ring. The match snapped a new truth into place. The second mate had handled the barrel recently. The old sailor lifted the scrap and held it up to the lantern. The wavering light made the fibers gleam. The second mate's face drained further of color. "Where did you get that cloth?" The old sailor, he kept his voice slow. The second mate swallowed. "From shore. From a shack I visited with the captain. He me to bring it aboard to patch a torn sail." His words did not convince the men around him. The old sailor watched the way his hands shook when he reached into his coat. That action, more than words, showed the second mate's turmoil. The surgeon returned with news. He had examined the sick deckhand and compared the marks to the hammock corpse. "The lesions match those on the dead man," he said. "We find signs of contamination. The meat in that barrel was rotten. But there is also agitation in the stomachs that suggests deliberate tampering cannot be ruled out." The room fell into a hush where only the creak of planks moved. The old sailor felt fear shift into a bitter certainty. This was not merely accident. Men began naming motives in small venomous threads. Some the provisioner had doctored the meat ashore. Others accused the second mate of selling and replacing the meat with spoiled goods. The old sailor kept returning to small facts. The torn ledger, the cloth, the captain's admissions. He organized these like tools. He had to act to prevent a mutiny that could unmake them in a storm or leave them adrift with no hands. A sudden bellow cut the talk. "If you took my brother's bread, I'll make you pay," a sailor shouted toward the captain. Hands reached for knives and fists balled. The boatswain stepped in and hauled the sailor away with a grip that left the man's jaw quivering. The old sailor moved to the ladder and looked down at the sealed hold. There, under sacks, the barrels waited like accusations. It was then that the second mate made a choice that shifted the night's course. He leaned forward and spoke loudly enough for the crowd to hear. "I will show you where the extra provisions went. If the captain will listen, I will tell the truth." The room tightened around him. The old sailor watched the second mate's mouth and the set of his shoulders. The admission was a small surrender. It changed suspicion into a search for fact. The captain did not smile. He nodded once. "You will tell us now, second mate," he said. "You will tell us before the men turn this ship into a court. Speak plainly." The second mate led them to a hidden locker behind a coil of old rigging. He pushed the planks aside and revealed a sack with a provisioner's mark and a small, damp box. Inside the box lay a scrap of a bill and a list with names scratched out. Men leaned in to read the scrawled list. One name matched the paybook's stamp. Another name was the provisioner's clerk. The old sailor felt the crew's anger split again, this time into a more precise aim. The ledger had been used to disguise sails ashore, but someone aboard had been pocketing the pay. The second mate them where he had been ordered to shift entries, and where the captain had signed. The captain's voice then moved thin and small. "It was meant only to bridge us until the next port. I did not know who took the meat boarded below." The rawness of his tone did not heal what had been broken. The bosun's hand found the ledger and slapped it on the rail. "Orders and lies are not the same," he said. "Men die for less than this." Voices swelled. The old sailor stepped between the two sides and put both palms on the ledger. He counted to himself the number of men who still stood and the number who would not survive another mistake. He felt the ship's keel press under the weight of too many clenched hands. Then the moment arrived that split the night. A sailor lunged at the second mate. The bosun grabbed him, and 3 others surged forward. Lanterns swung and a jar of oil spilled, sending a faint fire toward the ropes. The captain cursed and hands went for anything that could restrain. The old sailor's lungs tightened, but he moved on habit and purpose. He took the second mate's collar in one large motion and hauled him up against the rail. "Stop this now," he said, voice low and hard. The second mate did not resist. His shoulders sagged like a man who had been pulled through the ocean. The old sailor felt the crowd's fury lap at his back, but he held a small, steady mercy between them. He had to stop the ship unraveling. Rapid lines of dialogue broke out then, 3 to 6 back, and fourths of accusation and denial. "He lied! He signed it! We trusted the captain! We trusted the ledger!" What of the sick? Who feeds them now? The old sailor let the rapid exchange show the human fracture. Men spoke names and company deals. The second mate offered details of where the captain had met the provisioner, what coins had changed hands, and where a hidden pouch might still be kept. The captain paled, then reached suddenly for a small leather pouch beneath his coat. He threw it on the binnacle. Coins clattered and a scrap of a note fell out. Men bent. The old sailor leaned in and read the note. It was signed with the provisioner's mark and a sum that matched a missing batch of meat. The crew's suspicion snapped into a new clarity. There had been deliberate sales and a middleman ashore. The twist changed who they blamed most. A near-violent mutiny followed. Men pushed and shouted. The bosun had to haul the largest men apart. The old sailor moved to the captain's side and put one hand on the ledger while the other steadied the captain's shoulder. He negotiated then not with words of justice, but with the practical muscle of an older man. "Captain, you confine the second mate until dawn. You hand the ledger to the bosun. You redistribute the remaining stores evenly under the surgeon's watch. You accept a watch of men to patrol the hold. That will keep the ship. If you refuse, I will stand with the men." His sentences were short and made like orders. The captain met the old sailor's gaze and saw the blade of truth in it. He closed his mouth and spoke a single brittle sentence. "Do it." The bosun took the ledger and the guard led the second mate below. The surgeon went to the sick. The crew settled into a silence that was not peace. The old sailor's suspicion had led to confrontation, and then to a fragile order. They confined the second mate in the brig and bound him, with a watch on the door. The captain signed a terse note admitting clandestine dealings and placed the pouch of coins in the hold to be accounted for. The men redistributed rations under watch while the surgeon instructed how to prepare small, weak broths for the sick. The old sailor sat on a coil of rope and mended a hammock with slow, steady stitches. His hands moved on habit and need. Dawn came grey and sea-worn. The storm that had skimmed the night passed into a thin, wary light. The ship held together. The men moved with a new caution. Some glances held blame. Some moved to help the sick. The old sailor finished a patch and stood. He counted the names of men still aboard and felt a hollow where one name lay. He had contained the immediate danger, but the cause of sickness and the captain's choice would follow them to the next port. In the end, the captain made a reluctant admission and confined the second mate under guard. The ledger was left under bosun's care, and the remaining stores were redistributed according to the surgeon's plan. The old sailor handed a thin ration to the sick deckhand below, watched him swallow, and felt a small, sharp relief. He had held the thin piece that kept the ship afloat, even if wounds remained. The final sound before the chapter closed was the clank of the brisk iron lid and the bosun's key sliding home. The old sailor heard the metallic finality and let out a breath. He looked toward the hold hatch where the rotten barrel had waited and toward the hammock frames that still creaked above. The captain stood apart with his pouch empty and ledger closed. The old sailor walked to the fore and let the pale morning fall on his face. He had staved off mutiny, but the sickness and the captain's choices would not be solved by one night. He kept the ledger's loose page folded in his pocket and walked to the rail to mend another hammock, the ship's small continuance measured in rope and care. The chapter ends with the captain handing the bosun the ledger and the old sailor locking the brig and giving the bosun the key. The chain of custody now set while the surgeon tended the sick and the crew kept a brittle truce, last watch and the ledger as truth. The deckhand pitched forward against the lee rail and hit the planks with a thud that cut through the morning watch. Men who had been tying off the stays froze, hold him. The bosun snapped. Suspicion tightened in the old sailor's chest like a rope drawn tight. He stepped between the man and the sea and felt for a pulse before he could think. The fallen man's cheek was pale and cool. His forearm showed blotched red patches above the cuff name. The old sailor, pressing his hand to the man's sternum. The deckhand's mouth worked. He could not sound out a full answer. Around them, the watch muttered and glanced toward the hatch, the cook's low voice carried up from below. Quick orders moved across the small crew, bring him inside. Now the bosun barked and two men swung the hammocks free to carry the man below. The old sailor stayed at the rail until the bearers had gone, counting bodies and knocks and the steady roll underfoot. The problem was not simply seasickness, he thought. Suspicion pushed him forward. Inside the forecastle, the cook tore a strip of canvas and wiped the deckhand's lips while the old sailor crouched and examined the rash under oil, damp light. Cook. See the hold. Check the barrels. Now, The cook's hands were steady. His voice held the sharp edge of someone who had learned to keep order with food. The old sailor watched the cook's jaw as he moved to the hatch. A ledger had been argued over yesterday. The ledger had shown missing meat. That ledger sat heavy in the old sailor's breast like an unfinished sentence. They carried the young man to a lowered hammock. He coughed once and spat a dark string of salt and bile. Young Jacob, the boatswain, placing a palm on the boy's shoulder. "Jacob, lad, can you hear me?" The boy's eyes fluttered. The old sailor found a damp scrap of cloth tucked inside Jacob's shirt seam and pulled it free. Damp and dark with salt and oil, the cloth had the smell of the hold and the shape of a torn ration band. In the next hour, the ship divided into tasks. The boatswain and two hands pried open the salted meat barrel beneath the aft hatch. The staves had been cut. One face of a stave had a fresh gouge and a strip of wood missing, a clean line where a knife had been drawn. The cook swore and pulled free a half moon of meat wrapped in patched sailcloth. He held it up so everyone could see who cut the staves. The captain demanded from the quarterdeck, where he had come down at the sound of hurried voices. He kept his palms pressed to his thighs as if steadying himself against accusation. Who has been taking rations? The old sailor stepped forward with the ledger under his arm. He walked on sure, practical feet, ledger balanced against his chest. "Captain," he said simply, setting the book on the hatch with a thump that made the men look. He opened to the ration tally and flipped pages with a thumb that knew the ledger's weight. "Entries missing," he said. The captain leaned over. "You allege theft?" he asked, fingers splaying on the wood. His voice was cool and guarded. The crew's murmur swelled like a tide. The old sailor kept his gaze even, not an allegation yet. A record, he tapped a column where tally marks stopped, and a fresh line appeared in a different hand. "Rations listed here do not match stock. Someone has altered the tally. Look, this ink is newer, the handwriting smaller. The barrel staves were cut, not rotted." He let the sentence hang. The word theft finally moved from suspicion to possibility in more heads. Jacob would not. The captain began, then stopped when Jacob coughed a wet sound from below. The boatswain's eyes were hard. He reached out and caught the ledger, flipping it with a rough thumbs on the paper manner that was almost a challenge. "Who else had access to the ledger?" he asked. The question jumped from man to man. Voices rose. "You, captain, boatswain, you checked the whole night round. Cook, you wrapped that meat." Each short line landed like a tool on a deck. The old sailor listened and watched faces, feeling the emotional shifts as men moved from confusion to blame to cramped fear. They pressed the young deckhand until he could no longer pretend. The old sailor had always held a certain reserve when confronting a young man with a crooked choice. He would rather catch and repair than break. But the ledger and the gash in the barrel left no clean route. Jacob, the old sailor, kneeling to meet the boy's level. "Jacob, tell me plainly what you did." Jacob coughed and coughed again. He spat and then spoke in a voice that was thin but steady. "I cut a piece, old sailor. I folded it in sail and I sewed it soft. I sent a letter home by a port runner. My wife, she's got a baby, sir. They give me nothing there. I had to send food." His words came fast. "I took small bites, just to last, just to send." He avoided the captain's face. The cook slammed his palm on the barrel rim. "You can take from the ship stores, Jacob." Not with storms coming. He struck the wood again, quieter this time. Anger folded into fatigue. "We feed the whole watch on those barrels. If it's gone, men starve later." The captain rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Why not tell me?" he asked. His voice had the thin steel of command. "Why hide it and alter the ledger? That's a breach of trust." It's sharp, then softer. "And it endangers us all." The boatswain barked a short laugh that had no humor in it. Jacob's breath hitched. "I couldn't I thought." He broke off, searching faces. "I couldn't stand asking. They cut me off. I just took what I could and wrote my sister to fetch it at the next dock." His confession landed like a bucket of cold water. A hush followed. Then the captain's anger returned in a churned form. You put us at risk for a letter home. You made us weaker when the sea gives no quarter. Old sailor looked at Jacob and then at the captain. He felt the first emotion shift. Suspicion had pushed him to inspect. Now empathy nudged him toward practical remedy. He stood and met the captain's eyes. Captain, the ledger shows more than one hand and more than one night of missing meat. Jacob took a piece. Someone else falsified entries. Check the ink dates. We should not only punish. We should secure remaining stores before the storm. His voice was measured. The crew took in the plan like men always took in action. Some relief, some new worry. That afternoon, the quarterdeck grew tight with questions. The old sailor had carried the ledger there in hope of clarity. He and the bosun compared tallies, while the captain watched every line like a man checking a rope for frays. They spoke in short exchanges. These marks are Saturdayist, the bosun, pointing. These last 3 are today, different nib, the old sailor agreed, same ink host. Somebody tried to disguise it. Who handles the ledger most? The captain. The bosun shrugged. You and your clerk when at port. The cook records fed meat from the hold on a nightly tally sometimes. The lads make notes when they swap watch. It's a mess of hands. The old sailor found the captain watching the horizon, measuring wind with a thumb on his sleeve. The ship rolled and the waves showed a line of grey farther west. The weather closed in like a practical threat. Outside, the clouds thickened and the bosun ordered reef lines readied. The watch shifted into urgent preparation. The second emotional shift arrived. Worry over rations turned fast into fear of the storm and the thin crew. Men moved with a clipped efficiency that left little room for argument. The captain called for the helmsman while the bosun set the men to securing the topgallant. Keep 4 pairs on the mainyard, he said. No one goes below unless called. He stated it in short sentences that left a blunt space for action. The old sailor watched the men splice rope and lash tarpaulins and felt the ledger's weight in his coat pocket. That night, rain began in fine threads and turned to a hard sheet by midnight. The sky went black as a closed chest. The old sailor slept in fits and rose when the bosun shouted for reefing. The young deckhan's hammocks stayed low and still. His coughing carried through the ship like a keening cloth. At midnight, the storm bit. A spar cracked with a report that stood out from the continuous roar. A helmsman, arms white with cold and salt, lost his footing and reeled. A halyard snapped free and a line swung, snagging a sick sailor and dragging him toward the rail. The crew flashed into motion. Cut it! The captain ordered. His voice boiled above the wind. Cut the line now! The bosun hesitated with a hook in his hand, eyes flicking between the line and the shifting mast. The old sailor saw the sick sailor's fingers clawing the wet planks and the halyard chafing his jacket. The ledger's missing lines pressed like a small, private flame. The captain's order was practical. Save the mast, save the ship. The old sailor reaction was immediate and physical. He lunged forward, grabbed at the line and planted his boots. No, cut the lash from the belaying pin instead! He shouted, grabbing a cleat and heaving. The bosun moved with him. For a moment, the deck became a scrape of bodies and wet rope and shouting. The captain's face was a hard set of decisions. He reached for a boarding knife, eyes fixed on the mast, calculating losses in a dry, cold way. The old sailor saw the calculation and pushed against it with muscle and the force of his presence. Hands met the wet deck in a scramble. The sick sailor's weight dragged like a small wreck. The old sailor and bosun fought to free him from the falling halyard, while the captain ordered cuts to secure the sail. The helmsman called out course corrections. The ship lurched and a wave swept the quarterdeck in salt spray. There was a brief, brutal tug of conflict when the captain stepped between them. Old sailor, the mast. He began, the man first. The old sailor. His voice did not tremble. He pushed the captain aside and yanked at the halyard. The bosun drove a hook into the line and worked it free. The sick sailor slid toward the deck and the old sailor grabbed an arm and hauled him in. The captain's jaw closed. He spat salt and looked past the old sailor to the bow. The mast groaned and the sail billowed like a mouth. The crew held breath and effort in equal measure. Then, with a final straining shudder, the boatswain secured the halyard, and the line yielded without losing the spar. They had saved both man and mast by a narrow measure. The storm took things anyway. A block spun loose and smashed a section of rail. A seam opened and forced men to bail. By dawn the deck was battered and raw with brine and shorn lines. The captain stood with his hands tucked in the leather of his jacket, and did not speak for some time. The immediate crisis left the authority map altered. Men who had seen the old sailor reach for the halyard and the captain back away held new judgments. The bosun's voice carried weight now, where before it had been only bark and muscle. The crew began to move under a different rhythm. Below, in the swaying dim of the hold, the old sailor rearranged the ledger. He sat with the book on a barrel, and the sick sailor's breathing came through in small, irregular sounds above. The cook brought 2 thin slices of stewed meat and a cup of lukewarm broth for the wounded. Jacob's eyes were closed. His hands were folded over his belly like a small, guilty bundle. The old sailor opened to the tally and set an ink bottle beside him. He wiped the nib and made a mark. He did not write only to accuse. He wrote to fix the immediate problem. He relocated the remaining rations across watches, reduced the portion that had been unaccounted for, and wrote notes in a practical hand about who would stand extra watch to patch leaks, and who would be sent to mend the sails at the first break in wind. The cook came close and read over his shoulder, "You can truly mend what was taken, old sailor. We need more food at the next port. I know, the old sailor, but we can stop taking now. We can make the men who sleep with knives know that they'll be watched. We can keep the ledger tighter. And we can help Jacob without wrecking the ship." He closed the ledger for an instant and looked at Jacob. Jacob's eyes opened. He swallowed. "I'm sorry, sir." His voice was raw. "I didn't mean to ruin the ship. I just wanted my baby's mother to have bread." The old sailor put his hand on Jacob's shoulder. He felt the boy's bone and the small trimmer under the skin. "We done let a man starve when we can help him," he said. "But neither do we let the whole watch starve because one man hides the truth." He held the ledger and his choice in the same pair of hands. They argued about consequence in short lines. The captain demanded an example. The bosun wanted a quick lash. The cook wanted to keep order by heavier hands. The old sailor spoke in steady, plain sentences that bent toward repair. "Captain," he said, "make the punishment fit the need. Jacob should pay back what he can. He should stand extra watch mending sails and ration his own food for 2 months. We should also mark the ledger plainly, so no one else thinks to hide a cut stave." He looked at the captain and then at the bosun. The captain's reply came cold at first. "Either you let me make the discipline, or you do it your way and risk mutiny. I choose the ship." He paused, then added in a quieter voice, "I will not have the crew split when the sea is hard." There was a quick back and forth that turned sharp enough to clink in the dim hold. The bosun: "Captain, we nearly lost a man tonight because of what was taken and this miscount. We need stricter watches, a tighter logbook then." The captain snapped. "And an account of every hand that touches it," he softened. "And a measure to help dependents when men are honest. I'll write orders before we hit the next port." The old sailor heard the captain's resolve and felt a second emotion shift, from fear and urgency to a resigned steadiness. He could see a practical path forward. Enforce the ledger, shift the watch rotors, and let Jacob repay the debt with labor rather than blood. At dawn, the crew gathered on deck under a sky washed pale by a tired light. Men moved stiffly, their clothes still damp. The captain read an order aloud, his voice carrying over the low hush. "From this day, every hand that touches the ledger will sign the line. Failure to report a missing ration will be punished by extra duty. A small benevolence fund will be set up at the next port for dependents of men who bring proof of need. A murmur passed through the gathered sailors. The boatswain grunted. The old sailor observed the faces, some softening, some steeling. He knew that rules were paper and men were weather. Later, when the ship felt steadier and the immediate danger had eased, the old sailor sat once more by an empty hammock. He set the ledger on his knees and wrote a short note in the margin, inventory reconciled. Jacob to mend sails and repay in labor. Watch rotations tightened. Benevolence to be funded at port, he signed with a simple scrawl, the ledger closed. The old sailor tied a length of twine around it and placed it in the cook's chest, where the captain had instructed it be kept under lock and 2 witnesses. The cook nodded. "We'll hold you to it," he said. The boatswain stood by, arms folded, and for a moment his gaze and the old sailor's met with a shared, tired relief. Jacob moved to the rail and vomited into the sea, then turned and retched again into the deck. The old sailor offered him the cup of broth. "Drink slow," he said. "You will mend faster for a full belly than for a half one." Jacob took a small mouthful and then another, eyes filling with a moisture that had nothing to do with the sea. The captain walked by, his shoulders squared. He stopped at the corner of the hatch and looked at the ledger where the old sailor had left the note. "You did good work with that book," he said. Without warmth but without scorn. "Keep an eye on the men." "Keep me informed," the old sailor nodded. He felt the ledger's resolution settle into the ship like a new stitch. The crew's trust had frayed. He had mended a seam with a practical hand rather than a speech. He had saved a man in a storm by cutting different lines than the captain ordered. He had forced the captain to accept that sometimes saving a mast and saving a man required a different sort of calculation. By mid-morning, the sky cleared to a cold, paler blue. The waves calmed into a steady heave. The young deckhand sat at the fore with a needle and heavy twine, mending a sail under the old sailor's quiet guidance. The cook counted portions and rewrapped the remaining meat with thicker chaff. The boatswain measured and tied a few knots, testing their strength. The old sailor opened the ledger once again and added one last line: "Captain to post benevolence notice at port." Watchers assigned, boatswain and old sailor. He closed it, rubbed his fingertips across the cover, and slid the book into the cook's chest. He took the coil of rope at his hip and slung it over his shoulder. He walked out onto the deck and stood with his hands on the rail, looking to the horizon where the sun had begun to make a pale cut in the sea. The ship creaked and the men went about their labor without hurry. Jacob's mending made a neat, visible patch. The ledger's page lay flat and ordered like a small map of what would be done next. A knock sounded at the cabin hatch. The captain looked up and called, "Write the orders before the next watch change. Make sure the ledger is signed." He did not smile. He did not need to. The old sailor answered with a short grunt and walked below to set the next day's tallies. He closed the hatch and the sound of men working took over as he made the first neat entry. Rations accounted. Watch duties reassigned. Jacob's restitution assigned. He tied the ledger shut and slid it under the cook's chest cover, then felt the ship settle into its resumed routine. The last visible act of the chapter was a hand, the old sailor's hand, closing the ledger and tucking it away. The coil of rope resting at his hip as he rose to stand watch once more.